by Steve Austin.
Chapter 21. Judgment Pending. It is Wednesday, the 27th day of the month of Dharme. It is 10 o'clock in the morning. Shania and the 13 had just landed in the field outside the courtyard of the Palace of Boniscus, and Parnell and his underlings were in the process of releasing Darkinum from the bier, which had carried him from Pandana this morning, as Shania walked over and said,
"Did you enjoy your flight, my pompous little gnome-opus?"
Yeah, it was delightful, you gorgeous little smartass. Can't wait to go again. By the way, I hope you fall in a puddle of puss wash and stink forever. Bitch.
Ooh, quite the grumpy little gnome bastard this morning. Did the tree imps piss in your porridge, or are you just becoming more and more the little prick as you age?
I don't know. Send one of Parnell's boys back to Pandana to get my stomach, since I feel it may still be lying on the ground at the point from where we pushed, and I will taste the porridge and let you know if I think an imp relieved himself in it or no. And as far as being a prick, you know damn good and well I was born with a case of the ass, and have successfully and meticulously maintained that condition throughout the 56 years I've dwelt on this earth. So why would you not expect that particular behavioral art to become more and more pronounced as my years advance? And I thought that the foretold was supposed to possess this vast insight into a sentient's character. What a crock of shit.
Such a fine companion you are today, Dar. Usually one would have to visit an ogre village to enjoy company of the caliber the Inherent has seen fit to bless me with this morning. Perhaps we should visit the Ministry of Rejuvenation and see if Martus might be able to extract that cucklebur from your ass. Or you can just continue to be a surly little shitstick, and I can have Yves escort you to the dungeons where you might strike up a friendship with Nosh and the other ogres being held there. I think you would fit right in, my sweet.
Well, Longshanks, if Martus can't pull the burdock from my anus, I will happily commit myself to the dungeons and save you the effort of ratting me out to Yves. But in the meantime, I think we should perhaps go to our suites and shed this battle gear, then go visit with your father and see what may have transpired since we left for the gnome capital. And I think we may do well to seek out Kiriana and Karnada and see how they are holding up.
Shania giggled a bit and answered,
I was wondering just how long we would be back in Boniscus before you voiced a desire to visit that sexy little Noid lady. What was it, a whole 5 minutes?
I swear, Dar, if you ever lose the ability to follow your plunger, you will become so confused you won't know whether you need to scratch your boots or lace up your ass.
Yeah, this coming from a being who oft times forgets to raise her wings when she squats to piss. It's amazing you even remember to ankle your bloomers. But we can resume this discussion of the fine art of tinkling later. For now, let's go get changed and see Oticum. I'm quite curious to know how the rest of Aeros fared the first night of the Witch War.
Yes, I agree. About seeing father, not the pissing part, asshole. And I'd like to visit with Mum and Auntie Deneen as well. Come, my cantankerous little Nomo perv. Let's head to the palace.
and she bent and kissed Darkinum atop his head, and they strode away, arm in arm toward the palace. Jerrone and the newest addition to his traveling party, Breena, walked side by side along the narrow path through the woods between Black Mountain and the Great River Road, the cross-country alternate path they had taken to avoid the Bartane city of Pinnegree and the eyes of the enemy. The bright morning sun broke through the cover the foliage of the trees provided in a cheery, speckled pattern along the ground as the two conversed in effort to get better acquainted. Jerrone was asking questions of the pretty elf maid concerning her lengthy stay at the Round Robin, the inn/splurt house in Black Mountain.
I don't quite get it. You have been at the Robin since Otis sent you from Fornade 102 years ago. That is an awfully long tenure for anyone to hold a single position, especially a working lady. Yet hold it you did. But what I find even more puzzling is this. Over the course of the last 70 years, I have stayed at the Robin many, many times. I'd need a team of statisticians and an abacus to make that tally. Yet I don't recall ever seeing you, or hearing of you for that matter. I thought that perhaps you had migrated to Tanis prior to my becoming a frequent client of the Robin, but that is obviously not the case. How, pray tell, did you manage to keep yourself hidden from me for all those years?
And Breena answered,
Well, my dear, consider the very nature of the township of which you speak. Practically anything can be obtained for a price. That includes secrecy and anonymity. Many pounds of gold and silver did I disperse amongst the criminals which inhabit Black Mountain to keep my existence hidden from you. Ofttimes, when you would stay at the Robin, I would take my leave and vacate to Pinnegree and stay at an inn there for the duration of your visit. And a few times I even placed myself under house arrest and confined myself to my room until you headed back east. And there is a reason you thought I had migrated to Tanis. I paid for that idea to be planted in your head long ago. You likely don't remember, but a former member of Varro's network and former bartender at the Robin named Shimley fed that false information to you the first time you visited and inquired about me.
But why? Why not just introduce yourself to me and save yourself all the effort, stress, and expense of keeping your existence hidden? I would have loved to have known the mother of my cousin and best friend.
You don't know? Think about it, my good Manista. You were placed under death warrant because you found fault with the court system of belief. I gave birth to the bastard son of a potential future member of the High Court. Otis would have been executed were that piece of information to become public knowledge. Otis and I did not part on good terms, at all. Otis did set up my transportation from Fornade to here and paid the freight, but he also made the stipulation that if I ever returned or if I ever exposed him, he would have me murdered. And murdered slowly.
Oh my, hail the inherent. Breena, I am so sorry. Shit. The Manista are such a remarkably pompous and hypocritical batch of assholes. You poor dear. You have lived in fear for better than 100 years behind this? How did you maintain your sanity?
Well, at first, it was a 24-hour-a-day stress fest. But as time wore on and I realized that Otis was not going to breach the breaking wall, nor was he going to send any assassin after me, as long as I kept my distance and kept my mouth shut, the fear began to fade until it was nearly non-existent. I suppose perseverance is one of my stronger characteristics.
Can't argue that. I also know the pain of living under death warrant, so I can certainly sympathize. But another question arises. Why wasn't Oticum banished as well?
Again. Think. How many half-brothers does Oticum have? Why did Lorne, Otis's wife, so readily agree to raise the bastard child of her husband and a working lady? Why did she love Oticum as if he were her own? Well, Jerrone?
She was barren.
Precisely. Otis was seeing me with Lorne's consent and encouragement, and I didn't forget to renew the spell to shut down my reproductive organs on the night Otis impregnated me. He hired a witch to counter the spell with a curse each time he visited me until I eventually conceived, and then once I had delivered him a son, the son of a bitch threatened my life and stole my baby.
And Breena burst into sobs at that point. Jerrone called a halt and the party sat down to rest and refresh themselves. When Breena was finally able to compose herself enough to speak again, she continued her narrative.
I have lived with this fear and longing for as long as I am going to, Jerrone. Aeros teeters on the brink of disaster behind whatever it is this evil Minerva and her minions are attempting to unleash. The Bartanes of Pinnegree are once again itching to wreak havoc on the free species of Aeros. Whether Aeros stands or falls, I have gone too many decades aching to embrace my son who was stolen from me. And by the inherent, I will do so at least once before this land of ours is ruined. And perhaps I can in some small way aid in preventing that ruination. And I must also meet my granddaughter. Yes, I have heard much rumor of Shania, and have longed to meet her. I only hope she won't shun me due to feeling I have ignored her existence for 50 years.
My dearest Breena, I have of course known Shania her entire life, and I can assure you, she is perhaps the most loving creature drawing breath. I think there is about as much chance of Shania shunning you as there is of the sun rising at midnight. Put your heart at ease, my dear elven lady. I feel you will be welcomed in Boniscus by both your granddaughter and her father, and there you will find sanctuary as long as you need or want it.
Oh, I so hope you are right, Jerrone. With every ounce of blood, muscle, sinew, and spirit comprising my very being, I hope for that beyond what any word can express.
Gribinus laid the brush down on the railing of the stall. He had been brushing down his horse, Daz, and considering what he and his daughter Griselda should do, if anything, about the witch war over in Aeros. Riders from Regis had delivered word to Siege, then to Vargo, the capital of Tanis, the country just to the west of Aeros, concerning the witch war. Word, of course, then spread to New Vargo and Norge to the north, and Zosta and Rix to the south. Finally, word reached Bentley and went northward on the river Russ. He thought to himself,
For the sake of fuck, if the damned Bartanes are involved, then they likely won't stop until they have rendered another species extinct, or until they think they have brought another species to extinction. And what in the name of Dick has become of Panatesis? Witches used to be an honorable species. They helped preserve order between the different breeds and promoted harmony. Now they breed discord? This could prove to be worse than what happened 1200 years ago. We must not permit this. Should the Bartanes conquer the east, they could very well turn their gaze westward thereafter. Shitburgers and snot.
Gribinus's thought process was interrupted as his daughter Griselda came through the stable door to see if her father needed help grooming the horses.
Father, I just came to see if you needed help with Taz and Pinoche before I start dinner. Is there anything you need me to tend to out here?
No, sweet daughter, I am good. After I finish with Daz, I will be in and help you in the kitchen.
All right, Father, no hurry. I have everything in hand.
Griselda turned and headed back toward the house.
Fucking Bartanes, I should rather be in the company of ogres. At least ogres are for the most part docile and less provoked. Well, they were until Minerva got a hold of them. Bartanes are like pointy-eared Manista, pompous and self-serving. But unlike Manista, they have this perverse affinity for conquest. Yet for 1200 years, they for the most part kept to themselves and left Aeros to tend itself, being content with the bragging rights attached with the conquest of my people. Which in reality isn't much to brag about. It isn't much of a feat to annihilate a people who don't even have weaponry. Is it time the evil elvish bastards learned they did not cause the extinction they have boasted of for 12 centuries?
I am sure you have figured out that Griselda and Gribinus are Gunaranese. So, at this point, we must digress from our storyline and correct some inaccuracies in erosion history. Yes, the Bartanes did indeed enslave the Gunaranese 1200 years ago, and kept them in bitter bondage for almost 70 years. But as history can attest, any enslaved race longs for freedom, and the Gunaranese were, of course, no exception. There were possibly 12,000 enslaved Gunaranese inhabiting Gunari at the time, and that 12,000 had become hardened by their captivity and were on the verge of uprising. But Shias, the sovereign of the Bartanes at that time, was a shrewd ruler, evil, vicious, heartless, and shrewd. In order to spare himself a war which may have cost him and his people an unknown quantity of resources, and of lesser concern to the evil Bartane ruler, countless lives, he chose to annihilate the Gunaranese before any uprising could be organized. So he assembled a small army, and in the wee hours of the morning, he attacked the Gunaranese as they slept, intending to wipe them from the face of Aeros in one fell swoop. And when the sun rose on that fateful morning, he thought he had accomplished just that. But what he didn't know was that as thousands of bodies lay dead in their beds in the city of Ganari that morning, a small band of citizens of the city had slipped away prior to the onslaught of mass murder Shias perpetuated on the poor, defenseless Gunaranese. You see, even that many centuries ago, the city of Black Mountain was peopled with those who did not wholeheartedly subscribe to the ruling powers in the Bartane capital of Pinigri. And it was a citizen, or perhaps citizens, of that seedy township who tipped off Jizul, the leader of a small band of 300 Gunaranese who had begun to prepare for the uprising, as to the sovereign of the Bartanes' plan. At this point, Jizul had to make a decision: stand and fight the Bartanes, which would be a futile gesture at this point, and allow the Gunaranese to be rendered extinct, or take the 300 and slip away quietly and perpetuate the species. Jizul endured the guilt of abandoning the bulk of his people to death at the hands of the Bartanes, and chose the latter, and the 300 fled the city of Ganiri into Tanis, where they eventually settled and created a community just north of the small town of Bentley, on the River Russ, and named it New Ganeri. The Tanisians welcomed them, and even aided them in setting up their new community, granting them the land to build it upon, and acreage of farmland in the surrounding area, and even taught them of the care and usage of horses, an animal which was not indigenous to Aeros, and of which the Ganeranese were not even aware of its existence until their arrival in Tanis. Over the course of 12 centuries, the population of New Ganeri grew to over 10,000, and the city prospered. The Tanisians were a hardy race of people, quite similar to humanoids in many respects, with a few exceptions. Tanisians were very, very dark-complected, with coarse black hair that curled tightly and clung to their heads. Slightly larger in stature than a humanoid, and of stronger build. They were quite formidable physical specimens, and their lifespans were quite a bit longer than that of a Noid, living on average 250 years. Intellectually, they were more similar to the Ganeranese, having a love for history and the written word, and placing a large priority on educating their young. Also, unlike Noids, they possessed a basic working knowledge of magic, their mage centering on achieving harmony and communication with the fauna indigenous to Tanis. They were master horsemen and bred the most beautiful equines one could lay eyes upon. They were also well versed in battle, as they had to hold the trolls of the southern range at bay. All this they were more than willing to share with the Ganeranese upon their arrival in Tanis. But back to Gribanus, again thinking to himself,
The Ganeranese must do something to aid Aeros in these hostilities Minerva and the Bartins are inflicting upon the free people. But what? I think after dinner Griselda and I should make plans to visit with Dorsha, the mayor of New Ganeri, tomorrow. I feel I should likely resign my office as her deputy so that I might devote the entirety of my efforts toward helping hold Minerva at bay. This will certainly be an adventure, as precious few Tanisians have crossed over into Aeros in recent centuries. An adventure indeed.
It is Wednesday, the 27th day of the month of Dharme. It is noon, and we find Shania in the Contravisory, addressing the officers of the Free Peoples concerning the possible next steps to be taken in the current situation, referred to as the Witch War.
I am no strategist, but I feel that even considering any type of offensive at this point in time is extremely premature. Yes, it galls me to think of the suffering the Noids of Port Parsis and Morganton are experiencing at the hands of Minerva's minions. Trust me, I am quite aware of just how cruel that evil bitch can be. But I think attacking a fortified city right now would be a futile gesture on our part. With the troops we have at our disposal at the moment, the best we might do is fight them to a stalemate. Chances are we could be annihilated. Either way, that would cost us personnel we don't have to spare, and other resources which might be hoarded for use at a time when we have better numbers, that we might then mount an offensive without spreading our defenses dangerously thin.
Manish responded,
My lady, if you are no strategist, then I must be a bit foggy on what the definition of that term actually is, because you certainly sound like one, and a wise one at that. I agree with the foretold. We are still dangerously thin troop-wise at most of the locations we are trying to defend. Preen and Fornade are shaking in their boots right now, fearing an attack originating from Minerva's new strongholds in the aforementioned cities. The cities in and around Penichery are still vulnerable to an enemy advance from the Ogre townships and the Disselry. These three cities must be defended first and foremost. Minerva, in holding Port Parsis, may have us by the balls as far as overseas commerce is concerned, but as long as we hold the gnomish cities, we control the bulk of the food. Armies both good and evil alike must eat. Fortify Pandina, Dans and Donavoris before, as our dear Shania said, we even think about an offensive.
Then Ottocum rose and added his opinion to the discussion.
It is indeed hard to argue with the foretold, but there is one commodity that we receive from across the sea that, although not as important as the sustenance the gnome cities provide, is still of vast importance to our efforts. Armory tin. once the meager supply of that precious non-precious metal we have on hand is extinguished. We don't make weapons, we don't make armor, we don't make shields, we don't keep our troops shod, and on I could go. Perhaps now is not the time to consider mounting an offensive, but it is still of the utmost necessity we begin planning one. We must wrestle Port Parsis and Morganton away from Minerva if we are to maintain any hope of winning this war, and we must do it sooner than later. We are in the waning stage of the month of Dharme. I should like to see our defenses in place and a march on Port Parsis before the month of Narma is over. That means training new troops must become a high priority of all the species which comprise the free peoples. That means we must brew enough anti and Zanus draft so that each soldier, with the exception of the Spritish, carries enough in his pack to ward off Marfo madness over the course of many battles. Had Shania not shown up with her anti-madness spells in Pandana, we may have lost that city. Shania is the foretold, but she is not omnipresent, and even taking into account the sheer amplitude of her mage, I am sure the casting of her spells has a limit on its range. And finally, it means that we must be prepared for whatever it is Minerva is using this war to mask. At this point, that means we must prepare for the unknown, which is basically impossible. Taking that into consideration, this situation might necessitate getting a spy into the distillery.
But Oddicum was interrupted by a knock on the controvisory door. Danine rose and went to answer, and Panamede and Treleme entered, having just flown in from Black Mountain to relay the findings Jerrone had collected on his mission. Jerrone had instructed them not to mention Breena, but aside from that, all the intel Jerrone and company had gathered was relayed to those at the controvisory table. When the two half-sprites had finished their short narrative, Shania rose, grabbed Darkinum, and excused herself from the meeting, stating a very important errand had arisen and must be tended immediately. Once they were out of earshot of the controvisory, Shania looked down at Darkinum and said,
Did something about a certain part of Tralene's report strike you as odd, Dar?
Indeed. A witch and annoyed lady from Harless flee their home only to be attacked by ogres and end up here. Yes, Kirena, also known as Matheela, has some explaining to do.
Yes, but remember, they were and likely still are frightened. Frightened as much of how we will react as they are of what Minerva would have done should she have caught them. Approach them with compassion, but all the same, it is time to cut the bullshit and fess up. Kirena may well know exactly what Minerva is scheming. In fact, I would bet you my ass she does know. I think she wants to confess. I feel that in my spirit. I think we must be able to assure her sanctuary. She and Carnada as well. I think Father would be willing to grant them that. In fact, I will demand that he does.
Well then, let's go visit our friends from Harless.